What is economics and what can you expect to learn this semester? Let's take a look going through a couple of different explanations. What we really will see is the subject matter of economics, which we will talk about thoroughly, as well as economics is a structured way of thinking and solving problems. So right off the bat, this is Lionel Robbins' definition of economics. It's the science in which we study the human behavior's relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. In other words, there's not enough to go around. We have to decide who gets it, and this is what economics does. And you have two different schools of thought. One is that we use math and econometrics to decide an efficient allocation where all this stuff gets to the right people. And on another side, you have a group that believes that that's too complex of a situation and no one can know. And so the real question is Robbins' explanation enough? And we're going to look at a little bit more than just his explanation. And why is because we live in a complex world. And it's complex, not complicated. Complicated is bounded. The problems are bounded. They can be solved. We can use science and math and equations to figure this out. For example, putting a man on the moon simply took understanding the rotation of the Earth, the gravitational pull that keeps a rocket from leaving into space, and we can solve these problems, and we actually did. Complex has more. It's more nuanced, and there are more things that cause it to be unbounded, that things change. So again, Robbins is right. We live in a world of scarcity. There's not enough to go around. We have to decide who gets it. And we have to decide who gets it because people have different tastes. There may be 2 apples and 5 bananas, and I say I want all of it because I deserve it more than you do, but you actually really like bananas and I like apples. We just have different tastes. We have different talents. Some people are better at doing some things than others, and they're willing to do those things. I'm not willing to work cleaning out septic tanks. Other people are because relative to other alternatives they could do, that's not a poor paying job. We have information problems. How do we decide who gets what, why, where, when, how? Those are things we have to worry about, and we're always dealing with information problems. There are information asymmetries everywhere. We have incentive problems. How do we get people motivated to serve the interests of others and not just ourselves? And then information changes. That information we talked about with the information problems, it changes all the time. And last thing we're going to deal with is what we call a coordination problem. How do we get everybody working together to build things and to create more value for society? So let's start off with scarcity. Again, we have limited resources. There are only so many tickets and so many seats to see Luke Combs at a concert. Even if you were to expand that concert, well, it deteriorates. The venue. You could have everybody. Luke Combs is from North Carolina, so everybody in North Carolina can attend for free from their home, but you would never hear it if he's up in the mountains of Appalachian State singing to people. And so they're limited because there are only so many people who can fit in the stadium. We have to decide who gets those tickets. I'm not necessarily a Luke Combs fan. Why should I get it over somebody who's a huge fan? Well, how do we decide who those people are? And we're going to see how this happens. How do we, who gets land closer to an inner city? Why do some people live in the inner city, other people live in the suburbs? Why shouldn't everybody get to live where they want or on the beach? I prefer the mountains, so why can't I have that house overlooking Grandfather Mountain? Who gets fish from the sea? And how many fish do we pull out? These are things that we have to solve with the problem of scarcity. Next thing is we look at different tastes. This is cow's tongue. I'm not a big fan. My son loves cow's tongue. He has cow tongue tacos. So we have to deal with different tastes. People have different tastes, and they also have different talents, and these are things that make coordination a little more difficult because we don't know what those tastes are for each person and what those talents are until they reveal them. The information problem. Down not far from campus is a tobacco field. I think they turned to cotton, and now they're building homes on it. How do we decide that it's not worth cotton anymore? And what about other property that people are sitting on that we could use for housing or some other uses? We have to decide how this land is used. We have to determine how the metal, the plastic, labor, etc. that's needed to build that home is used. Why not use those for other things like a car or a boat or reading material, whatever it is? We have to decide as a society, as a system, how do we use these scarce resources at our disposal, and we have to find out who values them most, who can do the best with them when they need them. Want to look at the conserving open space. Some people really like open space more than other people, right? Some people really are okay living in a major city. Other people want wide open spaces. There are people who want to conserve parkland. Other people who want to turn it into a shopping mall. These are things that have to be determined with open spaces. And this is not just how do we get stuff to the right people so they can consume it. It's also how do we get stuff to the right people so they can invest it and create more value in the future. And those are information problems that have to be solved. Next, we want to look at incentive problems. How do we get people to work? If we had all the relevant information, we can simply assign people tasks and things to do, but we really don't have that information. And so we have to find ways of incentivizing people to serve the interests of others. How do we get people to minimize their footprint, to stop using so many resources? Well, higher prices, we'll see, can do that. So with all of this comes conflict. With scarcity comes conflict. If we're going to argue over who gets what, why, where, when, and how, well, we're going to have people competing for those resources, and that creates conflict. And we must come up with some means of cooperating, and a social means that is amenable to all, and it's fair and just. So we're going to look at different parts of this. First is personal conflict. Even if there was nobody else on this planet, you were on a deserted island by yourself, you still have conflict because you have to determine what to do with your time, how to spend your time. You can spend time fishing so you can eat more, or you can spend your time making a hammock so it's more comfortable to be there, but you can't do both at the same time. And so this has what we call personal conflict. Interpersonal conflict is conflict between two or more people. And when you have more than one person, then all of a sudden you're conflicting over how things are used, where they're used, things like that. So that's the interpersonal conflict. We have to come up with a way of resolving this conflict. So one thing we want to look at is a moral means of competing. And that's not so easy. We have what are called tribal instincts. A tribal instinct is it's about serving me and the people that I know around me. And this leads to what we call zero-sum games. So for example, if you kill a deer, then that's a deer that I can't kill and eat. And so historically, 200,000 years, 300,000 years ago, you were a threat. Other people were a threat to you. We have to come up with a system where we learn to cooperate, and other people aren't necessarily a threat. They're actually beneficial to us. But in a world where you don't have the right institutions, other people are a threat because they interfere with the things that I want to do. So a couple ways we can do this in order to allocate resources is force. We can simply say, I'll take what I want, to the victor go the spoils. I can beat you up, and if you want to try to get it from me, you have to come back and beat me up. Maybe you bring more people, but then I have an army. And hopefully we can see that if we spend our time with force, we're not going to spend our time creating neat things and doing things that help us to become wealthy and more cooperative. We could do fiat. Government orders things. The government determines who gets what. This has been tried in countries all over the world. Cuba, for example, this is a makeshift raft that people from Cuba used to sail to Miami. They were so desperate to leave that system. Everywhere this has been tried, it's been a failure, whether it's Venezuela, China, Russia, Vietnam, it's been a failure, Cuba. And so this doesn't work very well. And again, why? Because they're never able to solve the information problem and the incentive problems. If I'm getting stuff for free no matter what, why should I work? And when everybody does that, that's your coordination problem. 3 is gift. I can just gift it to you. Well, I have to first off come up to, that property on my own anyway, but this leads to what we call rent seeking. People spending time begging others for their stuff in order to get it, and rent seeking means I'm not necessarily doing things like creating new iPhones, making dishes, and things like that. So it leads to a poorer society. What we find is markets, they work very well. This is where people specialize and enter into voluntary exchanges with each other. And that comes about from Adam Smith, who in 1776 wrote a book called An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And he wanted to explain how wealth is created. And so he looked at countries that were rich versus countries that weren't. And he found some things that are really important. Now, this follows on the heels of his first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he published in 1759. And in that book, he explained what are called moral communities. A moral community would be my family. My family, we do not have a market system in my household. I do not pay my wife to do the dishes and she pays me to do the laundry. It's from each according to his ability, to each according to their need. We help each other. We don't keep records of who did what. We just cooperate on our own. That's not always scalable. We'll see that in a second. Smith also wanted to understand justice, beneficence, and prudence, or he explained these as a system of morality. You have to have justice, you have to have beneficence, that's kindness to others, helping each other, and you have to have prudence, taking care of yourself. And these are things that in a moral system, they do happen. And so this is where he explained market capitalism. He didn't call it capitalism. That was later a pejorative used to explain him. But what he looked at is, since moral communities don't scale, we have to have something else. And so we end up with what's called a moral order. We can't extend those moral communities beyond a few people. My close family, my extended family, maybe my siblings, but it doesn't really operate beyond that. Wealth grows through a division of labor. We all specialize in doing a few things and trade with each other, and this is what develops into what we call a moral order, because now I enter into voluntary exchanges. But we still have to have those institutions like property rights, contract enforcement, rule of law, sound government in order for this moral community to work. Within all of this, Smith wanted to understand and try to explain decentralized decision making. That is, we're all specializing and we enter into voluntary exchange, but nobody controls it. It's done through a spontaneous order. Now again, Smith didn't come up with this and devise it. He was just the first to set it out and write it in a comprehensive doctrine. And so this idea of an emergent order is very, very important, and it's something we're going to spend a lot of time on. Nobody sits around and controls what you do. Nobody's going to tell you the job you have to do. You are deciding for yourself how you want to spend the next 20, 30, 40 years of your life and what career you want to embark on, and you're doing that by thinking, what are the things other people need? How can I make... You're not doing it because you care about them necessarily. You care about yourself. At the same time, you're saying, how can I make the most money? And that's the spontaneous order that we're going to be looking at. And this is where the coordination problem comes in. Because we have to, how do we determine who does what, and how do you know how much to do? And this is where Smith called the invisible hand, and it's coordinated through prices and profits. Prices tell us what people want. Profits tell us how much to make of something. So prices reveal relative scarcity. If I see that the price of graphite has gone up, I'm going to find substitutes for graphite or plastic. Whatever it is, higher prices tell me something has become scarcer to use less of it, and if I can, bring more of it to the market. Profits tell companies that there are unmet needs. That more, if I see somebody making a really, really high profit, I want to enter that market so I can get some of those profits too, and I'm therefore competing away the other person's profits, and I'm doing society a favor by creating value where people really want it most. And again, this happens through an emergent order. Nobody controls this. It's the market process that does it. It's neither designed nor controlled by anyone. And economist Friedrich Hayek referred to it as a human action, not of human design. Human beings created it, but nobody designed it. It's just through our motions of trying to figure out what people want. And this is explained beautifully in Leonard Read's iPencil. There is a video called iSmartphone on Blackboard that has the exact same message through this. So the takeaways from this is economics is a social science to help us better understand how we overcome complex coordination problems. And how do we cooperate to allocate the scarce resources at our disposal? Adam Smith, the founder of modern economics, explained how this happens in an orderly manner, and it's done through a spontaneously emerging order. It's through prices and profits that we find out what people want and how to produce that at the cheapest way, with the cheapest method. Markets are not perfect, and they don't necessarily provide all of what we want, so we institute government to serve both as a protective and sometimes productive function. Protective function is the police. They keep somebody from stealing my property. Productive would be things like, roads. It's hard for markets to produce roads, so there's sometimes you want government to come in and do a protective and a productive function. Now, lastly, in terms of a structured way of thinking, when you learn economics, you learn not to make mistakes like this. And maybe we should stop asking why food is so expensive and start asking why corporate grocery store profits are at record highs. This is a ludicrous statement. We'll come to understand why through this semester. And when you understand economics, you won't make these same mistakes. The last is great quote by Adam Smith, is every individual is continually exerting himself to find out the most advantageous employment for whatever capital he can command. It is his own advantage, indeed, and not that of the society which he has in view, but the study of his own advantage naturally, or rather necessarily, leads him to prefer that employment which is most advantageous to society. In other words, you're self-interested, but in a proper system, that self-interest is channeled into helping other people.